She had learned to make herself small in corporate spaces, but when the billionaire's hand extended toward her across that glittering ballroom, past every colleague who had overlooked her, Tayana realized some moments demand you stand tall. Hi, my beautiful family. Let's start with a blessing. Dear Lord, I ask you to surround every person watching with peace, healing, and endless love. Amen. You are not just an audience. You are my family, the reason I push through on the hardest days. For those who are new here, welcome to the family. Please subscribe, say hello in the comments, and let's grow closer together. Each story I bring is my sacrifice and devotion. When you walk away early, it feels like my heart is left unheard. Please, stay with me through the journey until the very end. I love you always. Now let us begin. Tayana Williams stood before her bedroom mirror, adjusting the neckline of her midnight blue dress for the third time. The fabric was beautiful. She'd saved for months to afford it. But no amount of adjustment could quiet the familiar voice whispering that she didn't belong at Harrison and Associates' annual dinner. 27 years old, with an MBA from Northwestern and 3 years of stellar performance reviews, yet she still felt like an imposter preparing for battle. Her reflection stared back. Rich brown skin that glowed against the deep blue, natural hair twisted into an elegant updo, and eyes that held both determination and weariness. She'd learned to read every micro-expression in corporate meetings, every slight pause before her ideas were acknowledged, every time credit for her work went to someone else. "You've got this," she whispered to herself, practicing the smile she'd wear tonight. Confident but not threatening. Professional but not cold. It was an exhausting performance she'd perfected. Her phone buzzed. A text from her colleague Jessica. Asterisk, can't wait to see everyone tonight. Hope you're coming. Asterisk. The casual assumption that she might not attend stung. As if the company's only black analyst might skip the year's biggest networking event. As if she had a choice. Tayana grabbed her clutch and headed for the door, her heels clicking against the hardwood floors of her modest apartment. She'd taken the subway to work for 3 years while watching colleagues arrive in Ubers, had brown-bagged lunch while they ordered from trendy restaurants, all while outperforming most of them. Tonight, she'd allowed herself one luxury, a car service to the Four Seasons. Across the city, Julian Ashworth loosened his Hermes tie and stared out the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office. At 34, he commanded a business empire worth $3 billion, yet the thought of making small talk at Harrison and Associates' dinner made his jaw clench. He attended these corporate events out of necessity. His investment firm held significant stakes in companies like Harrison's, but they all blurred together into a parade of false smiles and calculated conversations. His assistant had briefed him. Harrison and Associates, mid-tier consulting firm, steady profits, nothing remarkable. He'd shake hands with the senior partners, make an appearance, and leave within an hour. Standard protocol. Julian's reflection in the window showed a man who'd learned to armor himself in expensive suits and emotional distance. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and blue eyes that revealed nothing, he'd built his fortune by trusting numbers over people. People disappointed him. Numbers didn't. His phone rang, his mother's weekly call. "Darling, please tell me you're not working late again," came her refined voice. "Just heading to a corporate dinner, Mom." He walked to his private elevator. "Oh good. You need to get out more. Meet people. Maybe find a nice." "I meet plenty of people." The elevator descended toward the parking garage where his driver waited. Business associates don't count, Julian. When was the last time you had a real conversation with someone? About something other than profit margins? He couldn't remember. I have to go. I love you, sweetheart. Try to actually enjoy yourself tonight. The line went dead as Julian slid into the back seat of his Tesla. Enjoy himself. At a corporate dinner full of people who wanted something from him. He'd learned long ago that wealth made genuine connection nearly impossible. Everyone had an agenda. As his car glided through Chicago's evening traffic toward the Four Seasons, Julian didn't yet know that tonight, someone would see him not as a bank account or a networking opportunity, but simply as a man who'd forgotten how to let people in. And Tayana, checking her makeup one final time in her car's window reflection, didn't yet know that the evening ahead would challenge everything she believed about her place in the world. Both were armor-clad and guarded, heading toward the same glittering ballroom where fate, and a simple invitation to dance, would begin to strip away everything that kept them isolated. The Four Seasons ballroom glittered like a jewel box, crystal chandeliers casting warm light over Chicago's corporate elite. Tayana entered through the grand doors, her midnight blue dress a stark contrast to the sea of predictable black gowns and navy suits. She lifted her chin, squared her shoulders, and prepared for 3 hours of professional performance. The familiar ritual began immediately. She approached a cluster of colleagues near the bar, her smile perfectly calibrated. Tayana, you made it. Jessica's voice carried that particular tone, surprised pleasure mixed with barely concealed condescension. You look striking. Striking. Not beautiful. Not elegant. Striking, as if her presence was somehow aggressive. Thank you. Tayana's voice remained warm, professional. The venue is gorgeous. The conversation flowed around her like water around a stone. Market projections, weekend plans, the new Italian restaurant downtown. She contributed when appropriate, her insights sharp and relevant, but watched as eyes glazed over during her responses, only to light up when someone else made similar points moments later. David Hartley from Acquisitions cut across her analysis of the Henderson merger. What we really need to focus on, he said, stealing her exact recommendation, is the synergy potential in their overseas operations. Murmurs of agreement. Impressed nods. Not one acknowledgement that she'd said the identical thing 30 seconds earlier. Tayana excused herself, needing air that wasn't thick with casual dismissal. She found refuge by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago River. The city sparkled below, full of promise she sometimes forgot existed. Taking a steadying breath, she turned back toward the ballroom and froze. Across the room, a man stood alone near the champagne station, and something about his stillness drew her attention. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, but it wasn't his obvious wealth that caught her eye. It was the way he observed the room, like an outsider studying a foreign ritual. Their eyes met across the crowded space, and for a heartbeat, she felt truly seen. Not evaluated, not dismissed, simply seen. Then someone stepped into her line of sight, breaking the moment. Ladies and gentlemen, the company president's voice boomed over the sound system. Welcome to Harrison and Associates' 20th annual dinner. The crowd gathered for the traditional speeches. Awards were announced, achievements celebrated. Tayana applauded politely as colleagues received recognition for projects she'd contributed to significantly, but invisibly. When her own name was mentioned in passing, a footnote in someone else's success story. Scattered, perfunctory clapping followed. During the dinner service, she found herself seated at a table with junior associates and plus ones, clearly not considered senior enough for the partners' tables despite outperforming half the people dining 20 feet away. She made pleasant conversation about Chicago's architecture with someone's girlfriend, while internally calculating how early she could leave without seeming unprofessional. That's when she heard it. I mean, affirmative action hires always struggle with the technical aspects, Richard Pemberton's voice carried from the adjacent table. He was speaking to a client, his voice just loud enough to be heard over the dinner conversation. We try to be supportive, but some positions really require a certain background. Heat flooded Tayona's cheeks. Her fork paused halfway to her mouth as the words hit their target with surgical precision. She'd analyzed more successful deals than Pemberton ever had, graduated summa cum laude, earned her position through merit alone. But none of that mattered when someone needed to diminish her achievements to elevate himself. The worst part wasn't the comment itself. It was the silence from everyone who heard it. The averted gazes, the sudden interest in wine glasses and dinner rolls. The complicity of bystanders who'd rather preserve their comfort than challenge injustice. Tayona set down her fork, her appetite vanishing. She'd learned long ago that responding would only label her as difficult or sensitive. Better to swallow the humiliation and maintain her professional facade. She excused herself quietly and walked toward the ladies' room, needing a moment to reconstruct her armor. But before she could escape, a voice stopped her. "Excuse me." She turned to find the man from across the room standing before her. Up close, he was even more striking. Dark hair, piercing blue eyes, and a presence that commanded attention without demanding it. But more than his appearance, it was his expression that caught her off guard. There was recognition there, and something that looked almost like anger. "I'm Julian Ashworth," he said, his voice low and steady. "And I couldn't help but notice that the most intelligent conversation I've overheard tonight came from your table." Tayona blinked, unsure how to respond. "I thank you. I also couldn't help but notice how certain people seem determined to remain deaf to intelligence when it doesn't match their expectations." His eyes held hers steadily. "Would you honor me with a dance?" The ballroom seemed to pause. Conversations stuttered to a stop at nearby tables. She was acutely aware of eyes turning toward them, of the weight of attention she'd spent 3 years avoiding. "I don't even know you," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the string quartet. "Then let's fix that." Julian extended his hand, palm up, patient and sure. "One dance. No agenda, no expectations. Just 2 people who might understand something about being underestimated." Tayona stared at his outstretched hand, manicured, confident, offering something she couldn't quite name. Behind him, she could see Richard Pemberton's shocked expression, Jessica's dropped jaw, David Hartley's confusion. The entire corporate ecosystem that had made her feel invisible was suddenly, completely focused on this moment. Time crystallized around them. She could feel her heartbeat in her throat, could smell his subtle cologne mixing with the ballroom's floral arrangements. This wasn't just about a dance, they both knew it. This was about being seen, being valued, being treated with the dignity she'd been denied all evening. Slowly, deliberately, Tayona placed her hand in his. "One dance," she said, her voice stronger now. "But I should warn you, I don't know the rules to this game." Julian's smile was the first genuine expression she'd seen all evening. Neither do I. Maybe that's why we'll be perfect partners. As he led her toward the dance floor, Teyana felt something shift inside her chest, like a door she'd kept carefully locked, finally creaking open to let in light. The dance floor felt like a stage under spotlights, every step scrutinized by an audience Teyana had never wanted. Julian's hand was warm and steady at the small of her back as they moved to the gentle rhythm of the string quartet. But her mind raced with calculations and consequences. "You're thinking too loudly," Julian murmured, his breath warm against her ear as he guided her through a simple turn. "I can practically hear the gears spinning. You don't understand." Her voice was tight, controlled. "This isn't just a dance for me. Tomorrow morning, I have to sit in meetings with these people. I have to. Look at me." His voice was gentle but firm. When she lifted her eyes to his, she found something unexpected. Not pity, but understanding. "What's the worst thing that could happen?" The question almost made her laugh, but not with humor. "You really want to know? They'll say I'm using my assets to climb the corporate ladder. They'll question every promotion I might earn. They're already doing that." His words were quiet but sharp, cutting through her spiraling thoughts. "I watched them tonight. I saw how they treated you before I ever approached." The song ended, but Julian didn't step away immediately. For a moment, they stood there in the center of the dance floor, surrounded by whispers and stares. "Thank you," Teyana said formally, already retreating emotionally even as she remained physically still. "That was kind of you." "Kind?" Julian's eyebrows rose slightly. "Is that what you think this was? Charity?" Heat flashed in her chest, anger mixed with embarrassment. "Wasn't it? The wealthy white man taking pity on the poor black girl being mistreated by her colleagues." The words came out sharper than she'd intended, but she didn't take them back. Better to establish boundaries now, before whatever this was went any further. Julian's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. "Is that really what you think of me?" "I don't think anything of you. I don't know you." She stepped back, creating physical distance to match the emotional walls she was rebuilding. "Thank you for the dance, Mr. Ashworth. Enjoy the rest of your evening." She turned and walked toward the ladies' room, her spine straight and her chin high, refusing to let anyone see how much their attention rattled her. Behind her, she could feel Julian's gaze following her retreat, but she didn't look back. In the marble sanctuary of the ladies' room, Teyana gripped the edge of the vanity counter and stared at her reflection. Her carefully applied makeup remained flawless, but her eyes told a different story: confusion, frustration, and something else she didn't want to name. "Well, well, well." Jessica's voice echoed off the marble walls as she entered, her tone sugary with false concern. That was certainly unexpected. Teyana met her colleague's eyes in the mirror. "Was it? Julian Ashworth doesn't dance with just anyone, honey. Do you have any idea who he is? Someone with good manners, apparently." Teyana turned to face Jessica directly. "Is there something you wanted to say?" Jessica's smile tightened. "Just looking out for you. Men like that, they don't have relationships with women like us. They have dalliances. I'd hate to see you get the wrong idea. Women like us." As if Jessica, with her trust fund and family connections, faced the same battles. As if they were the same. "Thanks for the concern," Teyana said coolly. "But I can take care of myself." Jessica shrugged, reapplying her lipstick with deliberate casualness. "Of course you can. Just remember, you've worked too hard to build your reputation here to throw it away over one dance." After Jessica left, Tayana remained in the ladies' room longer than necessary, trying to untangle the knot of emotions in her chest. The worst part was that Jessica wasn't entirely wrong. She had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to risk it all on. What? A dance with a stranger? But the memory of Julian's hand in hers, the way he'd looked at her like she mattered, kept surfacing despite her attempts to dismiss it. Meanwhile, Julian stood at the bar, nursing a whiskey he didn't want and fielding questions he didn't care to answer. "Ashworth, didn't expect to see you on the dance floor tonight," boomed Harrison himself, the company's founding partner. "Lovely girl. One of our analysts, I believe." "She seems exceptionally capable," Julian replied evenly. "Oh, absolutely. Very dedicated. We're quite proud of our diversity initiatives here at Harrison and Associates." The casual reduction of Tayana to a diversity statistic made Julian's jaw tighten, but he kept his expression neutral. "I imagine her performance speaks for itself." Of course. Though between you and me," Harrison leaned in conspiratorially, "these hires sometimes need a bit more guidance than others. Different backgrounds, you understand." Julian understood perfectly. He understood that Harrison was an idiot who couldn't recognize talent when it was sitting at his own company dinner. He understood that Tayana faced this kind of casual dismissal every day. And he understood why she'd assumed his invitation to dance was charity. "If you'll excuse me," Julian said, setting down his untouched whiskey, "I should be going." But as he moved toward the exit, he found himself scanning the ballroom for midnight blue fabric and natural hair twisted into an elegant updo. When he didn't find her, something like disappointment settled in his chest. This was exactly why he avoided corporate dinners. Too many people, too many agendas, too many ways for simple human connection to get twisted into something complicated and painful. In the elevator down to the lobby, Julian pulled out his phone to call his driver, then stopped. His thumb hovered over the contact, but instead of making the call, he found himself thinking about the way Tayana had looked at him. Not with the calculated interest he was used to, but with wariness born from too many disappointments. She thought he was playing games, thought his invitation to dance was some kind of power move or charity case. The assumption stung more than it should have, probably because part of him wondered if she was right to be suspicious. When was the last time he'd done something without calculating the cost-benefit analysis? When had he last acted on instinct rather than strategy? The elevator doors opened to the lobby, and Julian stepped out into the marble expanse, still no closer to calling his driver. Somewhere above him, in that glittering ballroom, a woman who'd challenged every assumption he'd made tonight was probably planning how to avoid him for the rest of the evening. Maybe that was for the best. Maybe they were both too guarded, too damaged by their respective experiences, to bridge the gap between their worlds. But as he finally pressed his driver's contact, Julian couldn't shake the memory of how right it had felt to hold her hand, how natural the conversation had flowed in those few minutes before the walls went back up. Some chances, he realized, were worth the risk of looking foolish. The question was whether she thought the same thing. Tayana had made it exactly 3 steps out of the ladies' room when the fire alarm began its piercing wail. The ballroom erupted into controlled chaos, expensive gowns rustling as guests looked around in confusion, waitstaff pausing mid-service, the string quartet's music dying with a discordant screech. Red emergency lights bathed the elegant space in an ominous glow. "Ladies and gentlemen," came the hotel manager's voice over the intercom, barely audible above the alarm. Please remain calm and proceed to the nearest stairwell for evacuation. Do not use the elevators. 20 floors up. In heels. Tayana suppressed a groan as the crowd began moving toward the emergency exits, like a slow-moving river of silk and frustration. This is ridiculous, Jessica muttered, appearing at Tayana's elbow as they joined the exodus. It's probably just a malfunction. The stairwell was narrow, forcing the formally dressed crowd into an intimate single-file line. Progress was glacial. Elderly board members moved carefully down each step, while younger guests fidgeted impatiently behind them. The alarm's piercing cry echoed off the concrete walls, making conversation nearly impossible. Tayana found herself wedged between a partner's wife who reeked of champagne and someone tall whose presence felt familiar even before she turned around. Julian Ashworth stood 2 steps behind her, his expensive suit jacket draped over his arm, his white dress shirt crisp despite the building heat in the stairwell. When their eyes met, his expression was unreadable. "Small world," he said, his voice carrying despite the noise. 20 floors in heels, she replied, lifting one foot to show the strappy stilettos that were already pinching. "Not exactly what I planned for tonight." Here. Without asking permission, Julian moved to the side of the stairwell and gestured to the handrail. "Use the rail for support. And take smaller steps, it'll be easier on your feet." The consideration surprised her, but she followed his advice. The descent became marginally less torturous. They moved in silence for several floors, the crowd around them growing increasingly restless. Someone's phone flashlight kept flickering on and off. A man in front of them was complaining loudly about missing his son's baseball game for this nonsense. The champagne-scented woman behind Tayana was breathing heavily, clearly struggling with the stairs. "Are you all right, ma'am?" Julian's voice was gentle as he addressed the older woman. "Just need a moment," she gasped, gripping the handrail. Without hesitation, Julian offered his arm for support. "Take your time. We're not in a rush." Tayana watched the interaction from the corner of her eye, noting how naturally kindness seemed to come to him when no one was watching to be impressed. It didn't fit with her assumptions about wealthy men who attended corporate dinners. Around the 12th floor, the inevitable happened. The line stopped completely. "What's the hold-up?" someone called from above. "Medical emergency on the 7th floor," came a voice from below. "Paramedics need to get through." A collective groan rippled through the stairwell. They were stuck. "This is perfect," Jessica sighed dramatically. "Just perfect." Julian had somehow ended up directly beside Tayana on the landing, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something subtle and expensive that made her want to breathe deeper. The concrete space felt smaller with him in it. "You didn't have to help her," Tayana said quietly, nodding toward the older woman who was now sitting on the steps, Julian's suit jacket draped around her shoulders. "Would you have just walked past?" The question made her pause. "No, I wouldn't have." "Then why is it surprising that I didn't?" Before she could answer, the woman with the champagne breath swayed dangerously. Julian moved instinctively, steadying her with one hand while pulling out his phone with the other. "I'm calling building security," he told Tayana. "She needs help." As he spoke quietly into his phone, Tayana found herself studying his profile. There was something about the way he moved, confident but not arrogant, wealthy but not entitled. At least, not in the way she'd expected. "Security's sending someone up," he reported, ending the call. "They'll help get her down safely. You didn't have to do that." "Actually, I did." His blue eyes met hers directly. Some things are more important than convenience. The words hung between them, loaded with meaning that went beyond helping a stranger in a stairwell. Teyana felt that dangerous flutter in her chest again, the same one she'd experienced during their dance. "Why are you really here tonight?" she asked, needing to understand. "At the dinner, I mean. You don't seem like someone who enjoys corporate networking events." Julian leaned against the concrete wall, considering his answer. "Investment due diligence. My firm is looking at several mid-tier consulting companies. Harrison and Associates is on the list. Looking at us for what? Acquisition? Partnership? Depends on what we find." The words hit her like cold water. Of course. Of course he was there on business. The dance, the attention, it was all just research. A way to gather information about the company from the inside. "I see." Her voice went flat, professional. "Well, I hope your due diligence proves fruitful." Julian frowned. "What just happened? You went from almost friendly to Ice Queen in about 3 seconds. "Nothing happened. I just understand the situation better now." "What situation?" "That I'm here on business? So are you. So is everyone else at that dinner. It's different." "How?" Before Teyana could answer, a commotion echoed from below. Security guards were making their way up, their radios crackling with updates. The medical emergency was being resolved. The evacuation could resume. "Finally," someone muttered. As the line began moving again, Julian caught Teyana's arm gently. "What's different about it?" She looked at his hand on her arm, then up at his face. In the harsh light of the emergency stairwell, stripped of the ballroom's elegant ambience, he looked younger somehow. More real. "You're Julian Ashworth," she said simply. "Billionaire investor. I'm Teyana Williams, analyst at a company you might buy. We're not exactly on equal footing here." "So that dance meant nothing because of our bank accounts?" The question was quiet but sharp, cutting through the noise around them. "That dance meant nothing because it can't mean anything." The words hurt to say, but they felt necessary. "We both know that." Julian was quiet for a long moment as they resumed their descent. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful. "What if I told you I don't know that at all?" Teyana's step faltered, but she recovered quickly. "Then I'd say you're either naive or lying. Those are my only options." They'd reached the 5th floor. The end of this strange, forced intimacy was approaching, and with it, the return to their separate worlds. Teyana could already see the lobby lights below, could hear the normal sounds of the hotel beyond the stairwell door. "Mr. Ashworth." "Julian." "Julian." His name felt foreign on her tongue. "In about 2 minutes, we're going to walk out of this stairwell and back into reality. You'll get in your expensive car and go back to your penthouse, and I'll take a cab back to my apartment. Tomorrow, you'll make decisions about my company's future, and I'll go back to being invisible in meetings. That's how this works." The lobby door was just ahead now, hotel staff waiting to guide evacuees back to safety. Their strange, suspended moment was almost over. "What if I don't want that to be how this works?" Julian's question stopped her one step from the door. She turned to look at him, this man who'd somehow made her feel seen in a room full of people who preferred her invisible. "Then you'd be asking me to risk everything I've worked for," she said softly. "And I'm not sure you understand what that means." The door opened. Light and noise and normal life flooded in. Their forced proximity was over, but the questions Julian had raised hung in the air between them, unanswered and dangerous. As they stepped into the lobby, Tayana wondered if some risks might be worth taking after all. But wondering and acting were two very different things. Dear viewers, have you ever found yourself in a situation where taking a chance could change everything, but the cost of being wrong felt too high? Share in the comments. Do you think Tayana should trust Julian's intentions or protect herself first? The hotel lobby buzzed with evacuated guests milling about in confusion. The fire department had given the all clear, a faulty sensor on the 15th floor, but the evening's formal atmosphere was shattered. Some guests were already calling cars, their patience for corporate networking exhausted. Tayana found herself standing near the lobby's massive windows, watching Chicago's lights twinkle beyond the glass. She should leave. Call a cab, go home, pretend this entire evening had been nothing more than another corporate obligation survived. They're saying it'll be another hour before we can go back up. Julian's voice came from behind her. Something about resetting the alarm system. She didn't turn around. I think I'll just head home. It's been a long evening. Tayana. The way he said her name made her pause. Not the polished, professional tone she was used to from colleagues, but something softer. More real. Can we talk? Really talk? About what? About why you think I'm playing games with you. She finally turned to face him. In the lobby's warm lighting, away from the stairwell's harsh emergency glow, he looked tired. Rumpled. Human in a way that made her defenses waver. I need some air, she said finally. The hotel's terrace was nearly empty. Just a few guests who'd had the same idea about escaping the lobby's chaos. City lights stretched out before them, and the evening breeze carried the faint scent of the Chicago River. Tayana wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how thin her dress was. Without a word, Julian shrugged out of his suit jacket and offered it to her. I'm fine. You're shivering. She was, but accepting his jacket felt like accepting something larger. Still, when another gust of wind made her teeth chatter, practicality won out. The jacket was warm and smelled like him. That subtle cologne mixed with something uniquely masculine. Better. She nodded, pulling the jacket closer. Thank you. They stood in silence for a moment, both looking out at the city. When Julian finally spoke, his voice was quieter than she'd heard it all evening. My father died when I was 16. The words came without preamble, without context, and they hung in the air between them like a confession. He built his business from nothing. Immigrant family, worked construction until he could afford his own crew, then his own company. By the time I was born, Ashworth Construction was one of the biggest firms in the Midwest. Julian's hands gripped the terrace railing. He used to take me to job sites when I was little. Hard hat, safety vest, the whole thing. I thought he was the most important man in the world. Tayana remained quiet, sensing this wasn't a story he told often. Heart attack. Massive. He was at a site meeting, arguing with some city inspector about permits. 1 minute he was standing there defending his work. The next. Julian shook his head. The doctor said it was instant. Stress, poor diet, genetics. Pick your contributing factor. I'm sorry. The vultures circled before we'd even planned the funeral. Competitors, suppliers who were owed money, employees worried about their jobs. My mother tried to hold it together, but she didn't understand the business. I was 16 and thought I knew everything. His laugh was bitter. I knew nothing. A couple walked past them, heading back inside, their laughter a sharp contrast to the weight of Julian's words. We lost everything within 2 years. The house, the company, most of our friends. Turns out they were more interested in what my father could do for them than who we were as people. Mom went back to nursing, worked double shifts to keep me in private school. I worked construction summers, learning the business from the ground up again. Tayana found herself studying his profile, seeing something she hadn't noticed before. Beneath the expensive suit and polished exterior was something harder, more determined. The look of someone who'd clawed their way back from loss. I swore I'd never be that vulnerable again. Never let anyone close enough to destroy what I'd built. He turned to look at her directly. Money became armor. Success became a weapon. And for 18 years, that worked perfectly. Until tonight? Until I watched a room full of people treat someone extraordinary like she was invisible. His blue eyes held hers steadily. And I realized that all my armor was just another kind of prison. The honesty in his voice made something crack open in Tayana's chest. She'd expected smooth corporate speak, practiced charm. Not this raw, unguarded vulnerability. Why are you telling me this? Because you think I asked you to dance as some kind of power play. Because you assume I see you as a conquest or a charity case. He moved closer, close enough that she could see the sincerity in his eyes. And because you're wrong. Tayana felt exposed under his gaze, as if he could see through every defense she'd carefully constructed. You don't know anything about me. I know you're brilliant at what you do, because I watched you navigate conversations tonight where people were actively trying to diminish you. I know you're strong, because you've survived in that environment for 3 years. And I know you're scared, because you think letting anyone see the real you gives them power to hurt you. The accuracy of his assessment made her breath catch. How could a stranger read her so clearly when people she'd worked with for years barely saw her at all? You want to know why I think you're playing games? The words came out sharper than she intended, fueled by a lifetime of disappointment. Because men like you don't notice women like me unless you want something. Women like you? Black. Middle class. Someone who takes the bus to work and saves for months to buy a dress for the company dinner. Her voice cracked slightly. I'm not naive, Julian. I know how this looks from the outside. Successful white billionaire, struggling black analyst. It's a story as old as time, and it never ends well for the woman. Julian was quiet for a long moment, processing her words. When he spoke, his voice was careful but firm. You're right. Men like who I used to be don't notice women like you unless they want something. He paused. But maybe I'm not who I used to be anymore. People don't change overnight. No, but maybe they change in stairwells. Watching someone show more grace under pressure in 20 minutes than most people manage in a lifetime. The compliment landed like a physical touch, warming something deep in her chest that she'd kept carefully frozen. I grew up in Englewood, she said suddenly, surprising herself. South Side. Single mom, 2 jobs, apartment that was too small and too expensive. Got a full scholarship to Northwestern. Worked 3 jobs to pay for everything the scholarship didn't cover. Graduated summa cum laude and still couldn't get interviews because my resume had the wrong zip code, the wrong school activities, the wrong everything. Julian listened without interrupting, without offering solutions or platitudes. Harrison and Associates was the 7th company to actually call me back. I thought I'd won the lottery. 3 years later, I realize I'm just a diversity statistic who makes them look progressive in their annual reports. That's not what I saw tonight. What did you see? Julian moved closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. I saw someone who refused to let other people's limitations define her worth. Someone who stood tall even when they tried to make her small. His words unlocked something she'd kept buried for so long she'd almost forgotten it existed. The part of herself that believed she deserved more than survival, more than just getting by. "This is crazy," she whispered. "Probably. You could buy and sell my entire world. So could you, if you wanted to badly enough." The confidence in his voice made her look up sharply. "What's that supposed to mean?" Julian smiled, and for the first time all evening, it reached his eyes. "It means I think you're underestimating yourself, Tayana Williams. And I think the world is about to find out just how much." "You're shivering again," Julian observed, though the evening wasn't particularly cold. Tayana realized he was right, not from temperature, but from the emotional exposure of the last few minutes. She'd shared more with this near stranger than she had with colleagues she'd worked beside for years. "We should probably go back inside," she said, but made no move to leave the terrace. "Probably." Julian didn't move either. "But I'm not ready for this conversation to end." Something in his tone made her look at him more carefully. The polished businessman from the ballroom had completely disappeared, replaced by someone more real, more accessible. Someone who looked at her like she was the only person in the world worth talking to. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Always. That thing you said about buying and selling my world. What did you mean?" Julian leaned against the terrace railing, considering his answer. "How much do you know about Harrison and Associates' actual financial situation? I know we're profitable, growing steadily. Nothing spectacular, but solid. Your company is hemorrhaging talent. 3 senior analysts left in the past 6 months. 2 partners are considering early retirement. And your biggest client is threatening to pull their contract because they're tired of dealing with management that doesn't recognize competence." Tayana stared at him. "How do you know all that?" "Due diligence, remember? I've been researching Harrison for weeks. You want to know what I found?" Julian turned to face her fully. "The most innovative strategies, the most successful client solutions, the projects that actually generated real value. They all had one name buried somewhere in the footnotes." "What name?" "Yours." The word hit her like a physical blow. "That's not. I'm just an analyst. I contribute to teams, but I don't lead. Because they won't let you lead. But your fingerprints are all over every major success they've had in the past 2 years. Julian's voice grew more intense. "The Henderson merger strategy that saved them $12 million? That was your risk assessment model. The Rodriguez account they landed last quarter? Your presentation deck, even though Davidson took credit for it." Tayana felt dizzy. "You can't possibly know all that. Paper trails don't lie. Email timestamps, document revisions, project contributions. It's all there if you know how to look." Julian moved closer. "You want to know what else I found? 3 headhunters have been trying to recruit you for the past year. You never returned their calls. How could you possibly? Because one of those headhunters works for me." The admission hung between them, loaded with implications she was afraid to examine. "You've been investigating me?" "I've been trying to understand why a company I was considering acquiring was systematically wasting its most valuable asset." Julian's voice softened. "The investigation was professional. Everything I'm feeling right now is completely personal." Tayana's breath caught. "What you're feeling?" Instead of answering directly, Julian did something unexpected. He laughed, not the polished chuckle she'd expect from a billionaire at a corporate dinner, but something genuine and slightly embarrassed. "You want to know something ridiculous? I've been trying to figure out how to run into you accidentally for 3 weeks. I've had lunch at the cafe across from your building 6 times, hoping you'd show up. I actually researched your favorite coffee shop on Yelp. The image of this powerful, wealthy man lurking around her neighborhood cafe, like a nervous teenager, made something warm unfurl in her chest. That's slightly creepy, she said, but she was fighting a smile. Completely creepy, he agreed. But I couldn't figure out how else to meet you. Hi, I'm Julian Ashworth. I've been studying your work, and I think you're brilliant seemed like a terrible opening line. As opposed to asking me to dance in front of my entire company. That wasn't planned. That was. He ran a hand through his hair, disrupting its perfect styling. That was watching you get dismissed and disrespected, and not being able to stand it for one more second. Teyana studied his face, looking for signs of deception, for the polished mask she'd expected from someone in his position. Instead, she found something that looked suspiciously like nervous sincerity. "This is insane," she said quietly. "Completely. You're a billionaire." "Technically, yes. I take the red line to work. I've seen you. Tuesday mornings, 7:43 train. You read on your commute, usually business journals, sometimes fiction. Last week it was Toni Morrison." Teyana's mouth fell open. "You really have been stalking me." "Admiring from a respectful distance," Julian corrected. "There's a difference." "Is there?" "Well, stalking implies malicious intent. This was more pathetic romantic interest." The word romantic sent a flutter through her chest that she tried to ignore. "You don't do romance. You said so yourself. Armor and weapons, remember? I said that's how I've been living. I didn't say I wanted to keep living that way." Julian took a step closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to look at him. "Teyana, I've spent 18 years building walls to keep people out. But watching you tonight, seeing how you handle yourself with grace and intelligence, even when the world seems determined to undervalue you, it made me realize that my walls weren't protecting me. They were just making me lonely." The honesty in his voice made her chest tight. "Julian, I know this is crazy. I know we just met. I know every logical reason this shouldn't work." His hand moved to cup her cheek gently. "But I also know that in 3 hours, you've made me feel more real than I have in years." Teyana closed her eyes, leaning into his touch despite every instinct telling her to pull away. His palm was warm against her skin, calloused in a way that spoke of the construction work he'd mentioned earlier. "What happens tomorrow?" she whispered. "I don't know, but I'd like to find out together." When she opened her eyes, he was looking at her with an expression that made her heart race. Not the calculated interest she'd expected from someone in his position, but something vulnerable and hopeful and terrifyingly real. "This could ruin everything I've worked for. Or it could be the beginning of something neither of us expected." The city sparkled below them, full of possibility and promise. In the distance, she could hear the sounds of the dinner resuming, guests returning to the ballroom, conversations picking up where they'd left off, the world continuing to spin despite the fact that hers had tilted completely off its axis. "One condition," she said finally. "Anything. Tomorrow, when we're back in our normal worlds, we pretend this never happened. We go back to being strangers until I can figure out if this is real, or if I'm just caught up in some kind of corporate fairy tale." Julian considered this, then nodded slowly. "And if it is real, then we figure it out from there. Deal?" He extended his hand formally, but his eyes were warm with something that looked like hope. "Strangers tomorrow, possibilities after that." Teyana shook his hand, acutely aware of how right it felt to touch him, how natural it seemed despite every logical reason it shouldn't. "Deal," she agreed. But as they stood there on the terrace, hands linked, both of them knew that going back to being strangers would be impossible now. Some connections, once made, couldn't be unmade. Some chances, once recognized, demanded to be taken. 3 days later, Tayana sat in Harrison and Associates' main conference room, trying to focus on quarterly projections while her mind kept drifting to a certain billionaire's hands and the way he'd looked at her on that hotel terrace. She kept her word. They'd returned to being strangers, exchanging only polite nods when he'd appeared at the office for what she assumed were standard acquisition meetings. But every professional interaction felt loaded with subtext. Every casual glance across the conference table carried the weight of shared secrets. "Williams, you're unusually quiet today," Richard Pemberton noted from across the mahogany table, his voice carrying that familiar undertone of condescension. "Don't you have thoughts on the Henderson projections?" Before she could respond, the conference room door opened and Julian walked in, followed by Harrison himself and 2 other executives she didn't recognize. "Sorry to interrupt," Harrison said, his voice carrying an excitement that immediately put Tayana on edge. "But I wanted everyone to meet our new partners from Ashworth Capital." The word partners hit her like ice water. Not potential investors. Not consultants. Partners. Julian's eyes found hers across the room, and she saw something there that made her stomach drop. Guilt, regret, and something that looked almost like an apology. "Julian Ashworth has agreed to a significant partnership deal that will take Harrison and Associates to the next level," Harrison continued, practically glowing with satisfaction. "This represents the largest investment in our company's history." Tayana felt the room spinning slightly. Partnership deal. Agreed to. Past tense. When was this finalized? The question came out before she could stop it, her voice sharper than intended. "Yesterday evening," one of Julian's executives answered. Mr. Ashworth was quite impressed with what he discovered during his evaluation process. His evaluation process. The words echoed in her head, taking on new and terrible meaning. 3 weeks of research. 6 lunches at the cafe across from her building. Studying her work, her contributions, her value to the company. Their conversation on the terrace came rushing back with sickening clarity. Your fingerprints are all over every major success they've had in the past 2 years. Not admiration. Assessment. I've been trying to understand why a company I was considering acquiring was systematically wasting its most valuable asset. She was the asset. She had always been the asset. This partnership will allow us to expand our operations significantly, Harrison was saying, but his words sounded distant and muffled. We'll be able to offer enhanced services, attract bigger clients, and of course, reward our top performers accordingly. Tayana's gaze locked with Julian's across the room. His expression was carefully neutral, professional, but she could see tension in the set of his shoulders, in the way his jaw was slightly clenched. I'm sure everyone is excited about the opportunities this will create, Julian said, his voice perfectly controlled. Harrison and Associates has some truly exceptional talent. The compliment felt like a slap. Professional praise delivered in a room full of colleagues who had no idea she'd spent Sunday evening sharing her deepest fears with this man, who had no idea he'd held her on a hotel terrace and made her believe that someone might finally see her worth. If you'll excuse me, Tayana said, pushing back from the conference table. I have calls to make. She walked out of the room with her spine straight and her chin high, but inside, she was collapsing. In the safety of the ladies' room, she gripped the marble counter and tried to breathe through the humiliation washing over her in waves. Stupid, stupid, stupid. Of course it had all been calculated. The dance, the conversation in the stairwell, the vulnerability on the terrace, all of it designed to get her to open up, to reveal information he could use, to make her trust him enough to lower her guard. She'd played right into it, hadn't she? Shared her insecurities, her background, her dreams. Handed him everything he needed to know about her value to the company and her emotional vulnerabilities. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Can we talk?" She deleted it without responding. 10 minutes later, another text. Asterisk, please. "It's not what you think." Asterisk. She blocked the number. That evening, Tayana was reorganizing her kitchen cabinets. A nervous habit that kicked in when she needed to feel in control of something. When someone knocked on her apartment door, she ignored it, then ignored the second knock. And the third. "Tayana, I know you're in there. Your lights are on, and I can hear you moving around." Julian's voice through the door made her freeze. A box of pasta halfway to the cabinet. "Please, just give me 5 minutes to explain." "Go away." Her voice was steadier than she felt. "I can't do that. Watch me call building security. The deal was already in motion before I met you. The papers were signed 3 weeks ago. I just hadn't announced it yet." Tayana set down the pasta box with deliberate care. "That's supposed to make me feel better? It's supposed to make you understand that everything between us was real." "Nothing between us was real." The words exploded out of her. 3 days of hurt and humiliation finally finding their voice. "You researched me like a stock portfolio. You studied my work patterns and my coffee habits and my commute schedule. Because I was fascinated by you. Because I was a business asset you wanted to secure." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the sound of her neighbor's television through the thin walls. "That's what you really think." Julian's voice was quieter now, but she could hear it clearly through the door. "That everything I told you, everything I felt, that was all just corporate strategy? Wasn't it?" "No." The word was firm, almost angry. "No, it wasn't." "Then why didn't you tell me about the deal?" Another long pause. When Julian finally spoke, his voice was raw with something that sounded like pain. "Because I was scared you'd think exactly what you're thinking now. Because I knew how it would look, and I didn't want to lose you before I'd even had a chance to find you." Tayana pressed her forehead against the door, feeling tears she'd been holding back for 3 days finally spill over. "You want to know what the worst part is?" she whispered, knowing he could hear her. "For about 12 hours, I actually believed that someone like you could want someone like me for who I am. Not for what I could do for your company, not for some diversity initiative, not for any strategic reason. Just me. Tayana. I believed it so much that I started imagining what it might be like to be seen, really seen, by someone who didn't need anything from me." Her voice cracked. "God, I'm such an idiot." "You're not an idiot. And I do see you. I see you more clearly than anyone else in that building, including yourself. What you see is a valuable asset that you successfully acquired along with the rest of the company. What I see is the woman who's going to revolutionize everything Harrison and Associates does, who's going to build something bigger and better than they ever imagined. What I see is someone so brilliant and strong and beautiful that I've spent 3 weeks trying to work up the courage to have a real conversation with her. The words were everything she'd wanted to hear 3 days ago. Now they just sounded like more strategy, more manipulation. "Please leave," she said quietly. "Tayona, please." She heard his footsteps retreating down the hallway, heard the elevator doors open and close. Only then did she slide down the door to sit on her kitchen floor, surrounded by half-organized cabinets and the scattered pieces of a trust she should have known better than to give away. Some fairy tales, she reminded herself, were just business deals in disguise. And she'd been foolish enough to believe in magic. 5 days of silence stretched between them like a chasm. Tayona threw herself into work with the kind of focused intensity that made her colleagues give her a wide berth. She arrived early, stayed late, and spoke only when directly addressed. If anyone noticed the shadows under her eyes, or the way she seemed to flinch whenever Julian's name was mentioned in meetings, they had the good sense not to comment. Julian, for his part, conducted himself with professional efficiency that bordered on cold. He attended necessary meetings, reviewed quarterly reports, and discussed strategic initiatives with the senior partners. But Tayona caught him looking at her sometimes, quick glances across conference rooms that held too much weight, too much unfinished conversation. On Friday afternoon, Harrison called an all-hands meeting to discuss the partnership's immediate implementation. Tayona sat in the back row, hoping to blend into the corporate wallpaper as she'd done for 3 years. "As part of our expanded capabilities," Harrison was saying, "we'll be restructuring several departments. Some of our most talented individuals will be taking on new roles with significantly increased responsibilities." Tayona's attention drifted until she heard her own name. Tayona Williams will be heading up our new Strategic Solutions division, effective immediately. This represents a promotion to senior director level, with all the accompanying benefits and opportunities. The conference room erupted in polite applause. Tayona felt like she was watching the scene from underwater, distant, muffled, unreal. She managed a professional smile and nod, but inside, her stomach was churning. After the meeting, she cornered Harrison in his office. "I didn't apply for a promotion," she said without preamble. Harrison looked up from his desk, genuinely confused. "You didn't need to apply. Your work speaks for itself. This promotion is long overdue." "Who recommended me?" "Well, Julian suggested that we weren't utilizing our talent effectively. When he showed us the analysis of your contributions over the past 2 years." Harrison spread his hands. "Frankly, we were embarrassed we hadn't recognized your value sooner." There it was, the final piece of Julian's strategy, delivered with corporate efficiency. He'd gotten what he wanted, a stronger company with properly allocated assets. And she'd gotten what she'd always said she wanted, recognition, advancement, respect. So why did it feel like the cruelest gift imaginable? "I need to think about this," she said. "Think about it?" "Tayona, this is a 40% salary increase. Your own department. Direct reporting to the senior partners. What's to think about? Asterisk, how do I accept a promotion that feels like payment for services rendered? How do I take a job that exists because a man I trusted used me to strengthen his investment? Asterisk. I just need the weekend," she said. That evening, Tayona sat in her favorite coffee shop, the one Julian had mentioned researching, though she'd been coming here for 2 years before he'd ever heard her name. She stared at her laptop screen, cursor blinking in an empty email that she couldn't figure out how to fill. "Dear Harrison, after careful consideration, I must decline. Delete. Thank you for the opportunity. However, delete. I appreciate the confidence you've shown in my abilities, but delete. Rough day. Tayana looked up to find an older black woman standing beside her table, coffee cup in hand, and a knowing expression on her face. I'm sorry. I'm Dr. Angela Freeman. I teach business ethics at Northwestern. The woman gestured to the empty chair across from Tayana. Mind if I sit? You look like someone wrestling with a decision that's bigger than it should be. Something about the woman's presence was calming. Tayana nodded, closing her laptop. Let me guess, Dr. Freeman said, settling into her chair. Someone offered you something you've always wanted, but the circumstances make it feel wrong to accept. Tayana stared at her. Are you psychic? No, just experienced. I've seen that particular expression on many young women's faces over the years. Dr. Freeman sipped her coffee thoughtfully. Usually happens when success comes wrapped up with complications that make us question whether we earned it, or whether it was given to us for reasons we can't control. How do you know I didn't earn it? I didn't say you didn't earn it. I said the circumstances are making you question whether you did. Dr. Freeman leaned forward slightly. Can I tell you something that took me 20 years to learn? Tayana nodded. The world is going to question your achievements no matter how you get them. If you work twice as hard as everyone else, they'll say you're trying too hard. If someone recognizes your talent and opens doors, they'll say you didn't earn it. If you take opportunities when they come, they'll say you got lucky. If you don't take them, they'll say you weren't qualified anyway. The words hit Tayana like a physical blow, mainly because they felt devastatingly accurate. So what's the answer? Stop asking whether you deserve the opportunity and start asking whether you can make something meaningful out of it. Dr. Freeman's eyes were kind but direct. The question isn't whether someone had ulterior motives for recognizing your worth. The question is, what are you going to do with that recognition now that you have it? After the woman left, Tayana sat alone with her cooling coffee and a decision that suddenly felt less about Julian and more about herself. 2 hours later, she found herself standing outside Julian's building, her hands shaking as she spoke to the doorman. I don't have an appointment, but could you please tell Mr. Ashworth that Tayana Williams needs to speak with him? The elevator ride to his penthouse felt endless. When the doors opened directly into his apartment, she found him standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, still wearing his work clothes, but with his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up. He turned when he heard the elevator, and the hope that flashed across his face when he saw her made her chest tight. Tayana. Her name came out like a prayer. I need to know something, she said, not moving from the elevator doorway. And I need you to tell me the truth, even if it's not what I want to hear. Anything. Did you push for my promotion because you felt guilty about how things ended between us? Julian was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer carefully. Partly, he said finally. The honesty hurt, but it was better than a lie. But mostly, he continued, I pushed for it because watching you get overlooked and undervalued was making me question my faith in the entire concept of meritocracy. You should have been promoted 2 years ago based on your work alone. How can I be sure of that? Because I've had my team run the numbers on every employee in the company. You're not just the most undervalued person at Harrison and Associates. You're the most undervalued person I've seen in 15 years of evaluating companies. He moved closer, but stopped when he saw her tense. I'm going to accept the promotion, she said. Relief flooded his features. Good. You should. But I need you to understand something. I'm not accepting it because of what happened between us. I'm accepting it despite what happened between us. Julian nodded slowly. I understand. Do you? Because this means we go back to being what we should have been from the beginning, business associates. Nothing more. And if I told you that's the last thing I want? Tayona's breath caught, but she forced herself to stay strong. Then I'd say you should have thought of that before you made me fall for Julian the man, when what you really wanted was to close a deal with Julian the businessman. The pain that crossed his face was so raw, she almost stepped toward him. Almost. What if they were the same person? He asked quietly. What if everything I felt, everything I told you was real? Then you'll have to live with the fact that I'll never be able to trust that it was. She stepped back into the elevator, her hand hovering over the button. Tayona. His voice stopped her. For what it's worth, I'm proud of you. And I'm sorry I ruined something that could have been beautiful. As the elevator doors closed between them, Tayona felt something inside her chest both break and heal at the same time. Some choices, she realized, weren't about getting what you wanted. They were about becoming who you needed to be. 6 months later, Tayona Williams stood in the sleek conference room of what was now Harrison Ashworth Strategic Solutions, presenting quarterly results to a room full of impressed executives. Her Strategic Solutions division had exceeded every projection, landed 3 major clients, and implemented innovative approaches that were being studied by consulting firms across the country. The Rodriguez account alone generated $2.3 million in revenue this quarter, she concluded, clicking to her final slide. And we're projecting similar growth patterns across all our new client relationships. The applause was genuine this time. No polite corporate courtesy, but real appreciation for exceptional work. As the meeting dispersed, Harrison approached her with something that almost looked like pride. Remarkable work, Tayona. Simply remarkable. I have to admit, 6 months ago, I wasn't sure how this new structure would pan out, but you've exceeded every expectation. Thank you, sir. I hope you're planning to stay with us for the long haul. We're going to need visionary leadership like yours as we continue growing. After Harrison left, Tayona gathered her materials slowly, allowing herself a moment to savor the feeling of genuine professional recognition. It had taken 6 months, but she'd finally stopped questioning whether she deserved her success and started focusing on what she could build with it. The conference room emptied until only 2 people remained, Tayona and Julian Ashworth, who was studying quarterly reports at the far end of the table. They'd maintained perfect professional courtesy for 6 months. Polite nods in hallways, brief exchanges in meetings, careful distance that spoke volumes about the weight of unfinished conversations. Tayona had wondered sometimes if the careful politeness was harder than anger would have been. Congratulations, Julian said quietly, not looking up from his papers. Those numbers are extraordinary. Thank you. She should have left then. Should have gathered her things and walked out as she had dozens of times before. Instead, she heard herself saying, Julian. He looked up, and something in his expression, hope mixed with caution, made her chest tight. Why didn't you ever fight for us? The question hung in the air between them. 6 months of careful professionalism cracking to reveal the wound that had never quite healed. Julian set down his papers slowly. What do you mean? After that night in your apartment, when I told you we were done, you just accepted it. You never called, never tried to explain, never fought. You made it clear you didn't want to hear explanations. Since when has that stopped a man who's used to getting what he wants? Julian was quiet for a long moment, his blue eyes searching her face. Because you were right. About what? About me not understanding what you had to risk. About the impossibility of building something real when the foundation was already compromised by business complications. He stood, moving closer but stopping at a careful distance. And because loving someone means respecting their choices, even when those choices break your heart. The word loving hit her like lightning, illuminating everything she'd been trying not to think about for 6 months. Don't, she whispered. Don't what? Don't use that word. Not now. Not after. After what? After 6 months of watching you transform this company. After seeing you become everything I knew you were capable of being. Julian's voice was soft but steady. After falling more in love with you every day, even from a distance. Teyana felt tears building behind her eyes. That's not fair. None of this is fair. It's not fair that we met under circumstances that made you question my motives. It's not fair that professional complications overshadowed personal feelings. It's not fair that I was so bad at separating business from my heart that I hurt the one person I never wanted to hurt. Julian, but you know what else isn't fair? He moved closer, close enough that she could see the sincerity in his eyes. It's not fair that I've spent 6 months respecting your decision when what I really wanted to do was show up at your apartment every single day and tell you that what we had was real. That it was the most real thing I've ever experienced. Why didn't you? Because you asked me not to. Because you needed space to build something that was entirely yours, without my influence or interference. His hand moved toward her face, then stopped, hovering in the space between them. Because I learned that loving someone means supporting their success, even when it means accepting their absence. Teyana closed her eyes, feeling 6 months of carefully constructed emotional walls beginning to crumble. I got 3 job offers this month, she said quietly. I know. You know? Word gets around in our industry. Goldman Sachs, McKinsey, and a VP position at Deloitte. Julian's smile was proud and sad at the same time. You could have your pick of any consulting firm in the country now. I'm thinking about taking the Deloitte offer. Something flickered across Julian's face, pain, quickly covered by professional composure. That's an excellent opportunity. You should take it. Should I? If it's what you want. What if what I want is more complicated than a job offer? Julian went very still. What do you mean? Teyana took a deep breath, gathering courage she wasn't sure she possessed. What if what I want is to find out whether 2 people who care about each other can build something real when they're starting from a place of honesty instead of business complications? Teyana, what if what I want is to see if the man who held me on a hotel terrace and made me believe I was worth seeing is the same man who spent 6 months respecting my space, even when it cost him everything he wanted? And if I am? Then maybe we start over. Really start over. No business entanglements, no professional complications. Just 2 people figuring out if what they felt was real enough to build on. Julian's hand finally completed its journey to her face, cupping her cheek gently. You'd be willing to try that? On one condition. Anything. This time we take it slow. We get to know each other without billion-dollar deals and corporate dinners and emergency stairwells. We figure out who we are when it's just us. I'd like that more than you know. And if it doesn't work, then we'll have tried. Really tried. Without external pressures or hidden agendas or professional complications. Teyana leaned into his touch, feeling something that had been frozen in her chest begin to thaw. "Ask me," she said softly. "Ask you what?" "Ask me to dance. Here, in this conference room, with no audience and no expectations. Just because you want to." Julian's smile was radiant, transforming his face in a way that made her remember why she'd fallen for him in the first place. "Tayana Williams," he said, extending his hand with the same careful formality he'd shown 6 months ago. "Would you do me the honor of dancing with me?" "I'd be delighted, Julian Ashworth." As he pulled her close, the late afternoon sun streaming through the conference room windows, Tayana realized that some stories didn't end with a single dance. Some stories began with one. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, you got a second chance to write a better ending. The music this time was the sound of the city beyond the windows, the quiet hum of possibility, and the rhythm of two hearts learning to trust again. It was perfect. Sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about perfect beginnings. They're about second chances and the courage to try again. What do you think? Did Tayana make the right choice in giving Julian another opportunity? Share your thoughts about second chances in love and whether trust, once broken, can truly be rebuilt. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It is as interesting and even more intriguing than you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.